Okay. Yeah.
Hey, welcome everyone to the May program of Voices for Justice in Palestine here at Rossmoor, Walnut Creek. We're recording today, Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. Today, our speaker is Mara Kronenfeld, the Executive Director of UNRWA USA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians in the Middle East. Mara leads the strategic vision, operations, and fundraising efforts for UNRWA, supporting their humanitarian and human development work. Mara has over 20 years of experience in international development. And Mara, I would just like to say up front that we are especially grateful, happy, and appreciative of you being willing to meet with us during this time that's especially challenging and busy for you. I also want you to know that this program is member inspired. So this is not an academic exercise by any means. We are very eager to hear what you have to say. So we thought you might begin by describing the humanitarian situation in Gaza right now.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much, and to the whole community here, Rossmoor at Walnut Creek, and really for inviting me to speak with you and for raising this subject, and for really seeking to learn more. I wish there were more communities in the U.S. like you. Of course, there are more and more, and we've seen, of course, people trying to and especially young students trying to educate others about what's going on in Gaza and in the Middle East more generally. And so just really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today. And yes, I will start out with setting the stage a little bit, particularly about the humanitarian situation in Gaza right now. It is absolutely a dark and harrowing time, and it just gets worse every day, frankly. And the last couple of days is no exception. The truth is that the latest direct information we have from our colleagues at UNRWA on the ground in Gaza is really from mostly from yesterday. And I think a lot has happened between yesterday and today. And we don't actually have the latest details because the situation is really changing quickly and very, very difficult. But I'll give some insight into that. Before I do, I just want to clarify one thing that is very is sometimes not as clear to the public at large. So I'll use this moment to clarify. So I'm the executive director of UNRWA USA, which is a local chapter, we call them, of UNRWA, the UN agency, but we're actually, because of US finance regulation laws, we're a separate NGO, a 501c3. And our role is really to raise awareness about the plight of Palestinian refugees and the role that UNRWA, the UN agency, plays in their food, health, education, housing, protection services that are desperately needed, and of course, disaster or relief in a setting of the siege of Gaza, like we're seeing now. Emergency relief is needed all too often in Gaza and the West Bank and in other settings where there are Palestinian refugees. So we don't actually implement on the ground. That's the UN agency, but we're supporting everything they do through fundraising and awareness building here in the US. And this talk today is part of that. So I'll move to what's happening on the ground in Gaza since the last couple of days, and essentially wanted to really focus in on Rafah, because as we know, Israel has threatened a full-scale invasion of Rafah. And also, we do know that there have been, unfortunately, some incursions into Rafah since about, I think it would be Monday morning, when we thought earlier this week, when we thought that a ceasefire was actually a potential. And I have to tell you, I let myself get, I let myself be optimistic for the first time in a while. And it was very, very hard to deal with the fact that that didn't pan out, and it's being reported in the news, kind of why that didn't pan out. That's another subject. We hope it will come back. All we want right now is a ceasefire. So when we were thinking about what a full-scale Israeli invasion in Rafah would mean, I mean, it would be absolute devastation. There are some 1.4, 1.5 million internally displaced people in Rafah. Rafah is an area in the Gaza Strip, and that area of Rafah, I think, is about the size of Newark, the city of Newark, except instead of having 300,000 people like Newark, New Jersey has, at about 25 to 30 square miles, it has 1.4, 1.5 million people. So you can imagine all of the people squeezed into that small area, and many of them living in tents, and most of them, the vast majority, or piled into small dwellings. The World Health Organization has warned that should there be a full-scale operation in Rafah, there would be, quote unquote, a bloodbath, really substantially increasing the mortality and morbidity of people there, and further crippling an already devastated health system. There are really only about 12 hospitals of the original 36 partially operating now in Gaza. Many of the hospitals, as everyone knows, have been directly hit or destroyed by the Israeli forces, and so the health system is at its knees. UNRWA itself operated before October 7th, operated some 24 clinics for primary and secondary care, and about 8 of those are operational now. So we're talking about a much more limited ability for the injured to be treated, and that's why an incursion, not only unfortunately what it would do in terms of the bombardment, but also how people could be treated with their injuries, is just unfathomable at this point to think about. In Rafah, in that area, there's, among those 1.4, there's 600,000 children. Yeah. 600,000 children, and we've all seen the disproportionate, this many have called this war, this siege on Gaza. Many have called it a war on women and children. So over 70% of those who've been killed, of the 35,000 people who've been killed, have been women and children. And that, I think, is, we've all seen too many of these images, which are burned into our consciousness forever, of people suffering. And that's not even, understanding or taking into account the fact that so many of the men who have died are civilians. And so it is truly, truly unfathomable. And it stops us in its track. It stops me, I should say, in my tracks every time I sit and think about it. And we do want to say that no matter what, UNRWA is not evacuating. UNRWA will stay there as long as they're able to, and UNRWA will continue and has continued to treat the injured and to provide as many resources that they have available. I think right now it's particularly tricky scenario. Aid trucks were coming in through Rafah and through Kerem Abu Salem, 2 different entries, and now we've seen the Israeli army take over Rafah. And therefore no goods are moving in and out of Rafah. Up till earlier today, we understood no goods were moving in and out of Kerem Abu Salem. And when I say in, that's moving in, that's food, that's medical supplies, that's fuel, which is absolutely essential for everything that's done in Gaza right now, because everything's being run on generators. They need the fuel to run hospitals, to run clinics, to run water filtration, to be able to have the trucks move and disperse goods. and then out because there has been critically injured people who've been medevaced out. So nothing was moving in and out the last since the takeover of the Rafah entry. We do understand just this afternoon, I believe, that the Karem Abu Salim entry has opened up again, and this is and then Israel has said they would open up Erez. I do think there is movement to open up Erez, crossing on the other side of Gaza, on the north side, but as far as we know, there has actually nothing. It's maybe technically open, but not open in any practical matter where goods are going in and out, and that is something we hope will change very soon. So when Israel talked about going into Rafah, this area the size of Newark with 1.5 million people, they said we want civilians to evacuate, and they said a certain area of Rafah, which is about 100,000 people, you need to evacuate to this area called El Mawasi. El Mawasi, think for a second. El Mawasi is about 7 or 8 square miles. It is the size, for those, I always try to do this for us here in the States when we're trying to imagine this in our head. That's the size of Atlanta Airport. It's the size of an airport. There's already 450,000 people in an area the size of a medium-sized airport, and they're telling 100,000 more people to go to that area. And we know that those in Rafah are absolutely living in terror and fear of coming under attack. Many more than 100,000 are trying to flee into a very small area that was never intended for human inhabitants. It's sand dunes. There's no infrastructure. There's no water. There's no sanitation. There is no infrastructure for humanitarian support. There is a mobile clinic that UNRWA has brought there. This is not caring for the civilians. This is not telling the civilians they can evacuate to a safe place. In fact, there is no safe place in Gaza. There is no safe place for Palestinians. There is no safe place for humanitarian workers. 182 UN UNRWA workers have been killed since October 7th. Each one of those is a war crime, and UN workers and UN spaces are not to be attacked, and that is a violation of international law. So we are extremely concerned with this idea that a population can be transferred yet again to a place that's supposed to be safe, that's called a safe zone, where we have seen time and time again in safe zones, civilians are hit, humanitarian workers are hit, and there, again, let me stress, there's just simply no safe zone in Gaza. And I also should state that the whole population of Gaza, some 2.3 million, already 76% of that population has been placed under evacuation order. So you're taking the whole population of Gaza, squeezing it into a very small area. And as we know, many of those people in Rafah now who are being asked to go to El Mawasi have already been forced out, displaced multiple times. Even in war, there is an absolute obligation to protect civilians and have their essential needs met. And a fundamental way to do this is to allow civilians to leave for safer areas. But for this to be done correctly under the Geneva Convention, civilians must have enough time to leave. They must have a safe route. They must have a safe place to go. And in that new location, their basic needs must be met. And finally, they should be allowed to return as soon as possible. We know that none of this is taking place right now, or has taken place in this siege on Gaza. And so again, no place is safe in Gaza. Overall, as I mentioned before, there's been 34,000 deaths, actually close to 35,000 now, 78,000 injuries. That's over 100,000 casualties. Over 14,000 children have been killed. There are probably 10,000 people under the rubble. The situation is getting worse and worse by day. And we are also facing not only the bombardment and the military incursions and military assault, but of course a man-made famine. And I want to go into in the next part of this conversation, I want to go into the discussion of famine and look into why a famine has not been why there have not been an official proclamation of famine in Gaza. Before I move on to that, let me just stop for a second, and Kathleen or anybody, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and then I'll move into the second part of the conversation.
Okay, I'll ask a question, but if you want to address it later, that's okay. I'm wondering, could you just say something about the difference between what UNRWA was able to do before October 7th and what it is able to do now?
That's a very good question, and no, very appropriate for right now. So in UNRWA operates in 5 field sites where there are Palestine refugees. UNRWA says Palestine instead of Palestinian, but it means the same thing. And those are Gaza and the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And Palestine, as UNRWA calls it, Palestine refugees were those individuals who were either displaced from, dispossessed of, forced to flee their homes in 1948 with the creation of State of Israel. And the reason they use this term Palestine is because instead of Palestinian is because UNRWA was meant to serve anybody refugeed, whether they were Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. So it was meant to take care of anybody refugeed as the State of Israel was created. And there were some 700,000 people who were refugeed at that time. And UNRWA takes care of them, of their basic education, health, shelter, protection needs of that original population, plus their descendants. But it's meant to only exist until there's a just and durable political solution to the plight of Palestinian refugees. So the reason that UNRWA is still taking care of descendants is there has been no peace, no lasting solution to the refugee crisis. And that's also the reason why there are many organizations and entities in the United States and elsewhere, and particularly some parts of the Israeli government that want to see UNRWA undermined because it keeps alive, in their mind, the refugee issue and the fact that there are refugees, and the plight of those refugees and their descendants must be part of any final status conversations. And so some think, erroneously, that by undercutting and undermining UNRWA, you can get rid of the refugee issue and maybe even the Palestinian people. And this is very, of course, destructive, cynical, if not racist and otherwise. So UNRWA, yeah.
May I, just to clarify this, so they are refugees until a lasting solution is agreed upon, and that lasting solution would include the right to return.
So definitely the right of return is part of it's a United Nations resolution. The political terms of any peace or lasting and durable solution are really up to the political parties and the people themselves, the relevant parties, not to UNRWA. UNRWA is strictly on a humanitarian provider, so that's not the role that we or UNRWA USA would play. But certainly the right of return is a resolution of the United Nations, and one that the final status negotiations will have to address in one way or another. And to answer your question about what UNRWA did before October 7th, I mean, UNRWA had a huge operation in Gaza. They educated some 300,000 students in some 270 schools. If you could imagine, in Gaza, where the government wasn't certainly wasn't as effective under a 17-year blockade and all the sanctions and inability to function, and this government basically UNRWA essentially provided the education, the civil works, the infrastructure. UNRWA provided health, primary and tertiary care. So UNRWA kind of existed in Gaza almost as a ministry of education, a ministry of health, because of the size of the population they served, in a setting in which the government, for various reasons, was less functional than it might be in other settings. So UNRWA provided a huge number of people with key education, health, shelter rehabilitation. You know, fortunately, Gaza is not at all new to conflict. There's been, depending on how you count, this would be about the 7th military assault in a 17-year-old's life, the one that they're experiencing now. And so UNRWA was often engaged in rebuilding homes, shelters in the Gaza Strip as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now you're doing more, trying to get food in, right?
Yes.
And to
Yeah,
distribute the food, water, right? Those kinds of things. And not, I mean, with the clinics destroyed, the schools destroyed, you can't do those kinds of things. So now it's more the humanitarian kind of things.
Right. And exactly, the focus now is on keeping people alive. The best way to keep people alive is to have no more killing, which would come about with a ceasefire. So that's the first thing we're asking for, and we want everybody to help us in, is calling for a ceasefire, of course, and writing your elected governments. And you can go onto our website. There's an easy link that will help you write a letter to your representatives demanding a ceasefire. Certainly in the last couple of days, we believe we've been closer than ever in a while to get to this point. But UNRWA is doing everything they can, albeit to get food and medicine to those in need. But it's as you could imagine, it's a war zone, and it's one in which Israel has made it very difficult to provide that humanitarian life-saving support, whether because for a long time getting any goods from the south to the north of Gaza, UNRWA would essentially deconflict. They would say to the Israeli authorities, "We're going to go north to deliver this food aid." The Israelis would say yes. They would give them their exact GPS coordinates, and then that convoy would be bombed, or a missile would be directed at that convoy. So unfortunately, too many times that UNRWA has tried to carry out its mission, they have been targeted. And so it has been very difficult to do this work. And then we also know that the number of trucks getting into Rafah has really been nowhere near as many as are required to serve the basic humanitarian needs of this population. There really should have been 75,000 trucks since October 7th coming in. There's been 25,000 trucks, and that's just a third of what's needed for the basic humanitarian support, i.e. food, water, medicine, and basic shelter for the people in Gaza. So
are there other ways that Israel is disrupting Palestinians' access, or UNRWA's access to services and food and other goods?
Yeah, I mean, the electricity's been cut off, a lot of the water supply has been cut off. And then there is this very cumbersome process to get trucks in Rafah, where they go through an inspection process, but which seems reasonable one might say is reasonable in a situation like this, but the inspection itself it appears very unreasonable in the sense that there are all sorts of things that are not allowed in, crutches, a wheelchair. Once certain medicines, once those things are detected on a truck, they're removed, and the truck goes back to the end of the line, and that line could be a 3 weeks long line of 300 trucks. So the truck goes through an inspection. Something they find is not admissible. The truck is sent to the end of the line, start the process again. And unfortunately, the hours of inspection are very limited. They're only limited to daytime. And so the sense is that the inspection process is not as efficient or as effective as it could be and should be. And I'll just say, when I speak about famine, I'll say a little bit more on this. But as the pressure from the U.S. and other countries really stepped up in the last month in terms of ensuring that Israel allows full-throated humanitarian access, we saw the number of trucks that got in go much higher, so that April was the month with the highest number of trucks that were coming in. So once they're forced, they're able to. So it feels more like it's a decision rather than something they can't control.
Okay, good. So a word about the famine and why it hasn't been officially declared a famine.
Yeah, so good. So one question is Gaza currently experiencing a famine? And yeah, global leaders have yet to issue a kind of formal declaration of this, despite a lot of evidence that we've seen. I mean, anecdotally, the ICC, the International Court of Justice, had described abundant catastrophic living conditions. We know that, like I just mentioned, humanitarian access has been severely restricted. We've seen this lead to malnutrition, starvation, some cases death. We also have seen Palestinians and other international humanitarian aid workers killed in the process of delivering aid, whether their convoy was bombed. And we've seen all too many airdrops where the airdrop has malfunctioned. It has actually, the actual thing dropping has killed somebody. Or we have seen desperate people who have drowned trying to get access to goods in the Mediterranean. And then we've also seen, and this happened to our dear colleague Hanny's family, we know too many families, particularly in the north, who were mixing animal feed into whatever little flour they had to make it last, and eating a bread made of animal feed and flour. We also know the UNRWA has seen far too many children and pregnant mothers and breastfeeding mothers who are suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. And as of April 17th, so a couple of weeks ago, there were at least 28 children under 12 who have succumbed, who have died because of malnutrition. So why isn't all this, we hear all this, is it a famine, is it not? And basically there is since about 2004, there's been a kind of an attempt to systematize and have a kind of global agreement on what constitutes a famine. And basically there's three kind of core criteria. One is there's 20% of the population faces an extreme lack of food, 30% of the population faces malnutrition, and then there's an average of 2 adult deaths a day from malnutrition or hunger, or 4 children a day. And by that threshold, famine is in Gaza. It's particularly in the north of Gaza, and the international body examining this and doing the analysis says that where there is not famine, there will very likely be famine very soon. And yet we haven't had the proclamation. This would normally come from a UN body. It would come from, for example, the US State Department, other global leaders. And instead we've heard kind of somewhat circumspect statements. Famine's quite possibly present. It's in part of the country. We did have Samantha Powers of the USAID finally say in a couple of weeks ago that there is famine. But again, what we're looking for is a kind of proclamation, and what that proclamation would do and why it hasn't been said yet is, we believe, political, because if that proclamation were there, food would be surged to the area. There'd be much more pressure for humanitarian.
There we go. There we go.
So I shouldn't say we, because but at least the people studying this who I've been reading, and actually two main researchers from the Center for Strategic and International Studies have said this is what's going on, that there's a political kind of, whatever the political will isn't there. If the political will is there, it will force the actors to allow food in. And at the most critical level of hunger, which is called IPC5, or which is defined as catastrophe/famine, as of a month ago, we already knew there were 677,000 people at this level, with a projection of 1 million by June, so a couple of weeks from now. There were only 490,000 in that level in Somalia when a famine was declared in 2011, and a famine was declared in Sudan when there were only 80,000 at that level. So there's something clearly not letting this declaration be made when it has been made under very serious but perhaps less dire circumstances in other countries. And you know, in terms of treating famine, if that declaration to be made, we would surge, like I said, surge humanitarian. The world's leaders would surge humanitarian support to this area. The inspection process would be less convoluted, so you can get more trucks in. Trucks are the most effective, efficient way to get food in. And then also there would be an attempt to kind of rebuild some of the market infrastructure. Unfortunately, 70% of the livestock have been destroyed in Gaza, and over 40% of crops. So, and I think all this is just interesting. I guess the last thing I'll say before I stop for some more questions is this, you know, one might argue that this is a weaponization of hunger, and this is a man-made famine. And Antony Blinken had said in the past, he's been quoted as saying, there are now about 260 million people around the world who are acutely food insecure. And in turn, this food insecurity itself drives conflict. It drives forced migration. It stunts growth, both physical and economic growth. It holds countries back. It holds people back. And then he said, we are increasingly seeing food being used as a weapon of war, for leverage, for political purposes in conflict and after conflict. So we wanted to put the focus on both these challenges, rising food insecurity, at the same time the use of food as a weapon of war. And of course, this was vis-a-vis Ukraine and the Russian war in Ukraine, but obviously there's not the same commentary around what's going on in Gaza right now.
Yes. Okay. Well, we said we wouldn't keep you very long, so maybe just 2 questions, but say whatever you want to say, of course. Well, one thing, well, okay, maybe before that, we have this short video of an Israeli spokesperson saying that it would be impossible for Israel to win this war, she called it a war, without destroying UNRWA. Now, why do you think she and maybe others see it that way?
I mean, it's very blatant that and obvious that UNRWA keeps this population alive. UNRWA also the very existence of UNRWA is saying there's a refugee population, and it is serving that refugee population, and actually some 98% of the 30,000 people who work for UNRWA are Palestinian refugees themselves. And to get rid of UNRWA, perhaps a unsophisticated person might think would be, maybe that's the fastest route to get rid of the right of return, to get rid of the refugee problem, to get rid of the idea of two states, of a two-state solution, and get rid of the need to address this population. So UNRWA is keeping, it's as cynical as UNRWA is keeping these people alive. UNRWA is keeping people alive, and they're keeping refugees alive. And I wish it was less cynical than that.
Right. Okay. And then I have to say, I'm surprised to hear you say we can go to UNRWA's website and there's a petition there and to sign it for demanding a permanent ceasefire. I assumed that an agency like UNRWA wasn't allowed to advocate for something like a permanent ceasefire. So could you explain that?
Yeah, UNRWA can't. So again, I have to make clear, UNRWA USA is an NGO. So it's going to UNRWA USA's website. We can advocate. We have, as a 501c3, you have certain ability to advocate. There's there's a threshold at which you can engage in such activities. So we are doing that, not UNRWA.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are an NGO. We are not the agency. We just work hand in hand with the agency. But we are legally two completely separate institutions.
Okay, very good.
But you brought up a very good point. UNRWA is cannot lobby or that they are saying, I don't know how you define advocacy, but definitely the leaders are and the leaders, frankly, of every UN agency and every international development agency are calling for a ceasefire to stop the killing.
So that is one thing that we can do.
Yes.
Other things that you can think of that we can do, our audience, our members are eager, most of them are eager to know, what can we do?
Yeah, thank you. So one is attending events like this, trying to understand and not take some of the kind of cynical polarization that is happening in our media. And I tell you this very personally as a Jewish American whose grandfather escaped Nazi Germany, and who said never again. And when he said never again, like so many of the Jewish people who are supporting Palestinians, it was because it should happen to never again for anybody, whatever religion you are, whatever background you are, wherever you were born. And I happen to be married to a wonderful gentleman from Morocco who's Muslim, Moroccan American. My kids are half Jewish, half Muslim. And I only bring that up because everything I do every day in my life is because I know, and I need everyone else to know, that their Jewish blood is no different from their Muslim blood, and their Muslim blood is no different from their Jewish blood. And unfortunately, this is my own personal opinion now, a lot of what's driving this is prejudice and bigotry and racism, and the polarization, the idea that you are anti-Semitic if you are critical of Israeli policies is something that even that polarization I find anti-Semitic, because it's telling me as a Jewish person I can only think one way. Yeah. And I fundamentally disagree. So one thing is to keep learning, is to keep talking. Another thing is that the work that we do, as you've seen, is under attack. It's under attack with bills in Congress that try to say UNRWA is a terrorist organization. That's been proven incorrect by the Kelowna report, and we already knew that, but the Kelowna report made that abundantly clear. And I think that I I may have been naive a couple of years ago not to understand the degree to which there are lies in the public discourse that become truths when people repeat them enough. So investigate, interrogate the things that you're told, and then of course we always the contributions are so important. We went from, after October 7th and the siege of Gaza, when it started, we went from 11,000 donors in the US to now 150,000 donors. And that's just proof that Americans care. Whatever our government's doing, Americans care. That gives us hope. And so we are always any support anybody in the community can provide is life-saving support. And we were able to send $15 million to UNRWA 10 days ago because of all that support. So that's what keeps me working every day and hopeful. All of you, basically.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And many of us are with you personally and UNRWA all the way, and admire you, and stay strong, and we'll do all we can.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and I wish the best for your community. And I'm from California, so maybe I'll see you out there one of these days.
Whereabouts in California?
I'm from Southern California, Riverside, but went to Stanford, so I know the Walnut Creek. I know the Bay Area, and I get out. We have our Gaza 5K in San Francisco probably every other year. So make sure you stay tuned. We're not going to have it this year, but likely again next year in September. And it's an amazing day, family-filled fun with a 5K fundraising for trauma relief for children in Gaza. So we hope to see you then.
We better start getting in shape. Okay. Thank you very much, Mara.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.